Christianity in the 3rd century was largely the time of the ante-Nicene Fathers, who wrote after the Apostolic Fathers of the 1st and 2nd centuries, but before the First Council of Nicaea in 325. As the Roman Empire experienced the crisis of the 3rd century, the Emperor Decius enacted measures intended to restore stability and unity, including a requirement that Roman citizens affirm their loyalty through religious ceremonies pertaining to imperial cult. In 212, universal citizenship had been granted to all freeborn inhabitants of the empire, and with the Edict of Decius enforcing religious conformity in 250, Christian citizens faced an intractable conflict. Any citizen who refused to participate in the empire-wide supplication was subject to the death penalty, although lasting only a year. The Decian persecution was a severe departure from previous imperial policy that Christians were not to be sought out and prosecuted as inherently disloyal. Even under Decius, Orthodox Christians were subject to arrest only for their refusal to participate in Roman civic religion, and were not prohibited from assembling for worship. Gnostics seem not to have been persecuted. Christianity flourished during the 4 decades known as the Little Peace of the Church, beginning with the reign of Gallienus, who issued the first official edict of tolerance regarding Christianity. The era of coexistence ended when Diocletian launched the final and great persecution in 303. Early Christianity. Defining Scripture. The biblical canon began with the officially accepted books of the Koine Greek Old Testament. The Septuagint or 70 is accepted as the foundation of the Christian faith along with the Gospels, Book of Revelation and letters of the Apostles of the New Testament. By the early 200s, Origen of Alexandria may have been using the same 27 books as in the modern New Testament, though there were still disputes over the canonicity of Hebrews, James, 2 Peter, 2 John and 3 John, and Revelation, referred to as the Anti-Legomena heresies. The letters accepted by many Christians as part of Scripture warned about mixing Judaism with Christianity, leading to decisions reached in the First Ecumenical Council, which was convoked by Emperor Constantine at Nicaea in 325 in response to further disruptive polemical controversy within the Christian community. In that case, Arian disputes over the nature of the Trinity. Before 325, the heretical nature of some beliefs was a matter of much debate within the churches. After 325, some opinion was formulated as dogma through the canons promulgated by the councils. Early iconography. Christian art emerged only relatively late. According to art historian Andrei Graber, the first known Christian images emerge from about AD 200. Though there is some literary evidence that small domestic images were used earlier, although many Hellenized Jews seem, as at the Dura Europos synagogue, to have had images of religious figures. The traditional Mosaic prohibition of graven images, no doubt retained some effect. This early rejection of images, although never proclaimed by theologians, and the necessity to hide Christian practice from persecution, leaves few archaeological records regarding early Christianity and its evolution. The oldest Christian paintings are from the Roman catacombs, dated to about 200, and the oldest Christian sculptures are from sarcophagi, dating to the beginning of the 3rd century. Monasticism. Institutional Christian monasticism seems to have begun in the deserts in 3rd century Egypt as a kind of living martyrdom. Antony of Egypt is the best known of these early hermit monks. Antony the Great and Pachomius were early monastic innovators in Egypt, although Paul the Hermit is the first Christian historically known to have been living as a monk. Eastern Orthodoxy looks to Basil of Caesarea as a founding monastic legislator, as well too as the example of the Desert Fathers. Shortly after 360, Martin of Tours introduced monasticism to the West. Benedict of Nursia, who lived a century later, established the rule that led to him being credited with the title of Father of Western Monasticism. Scholars such as Lester K. Little attribute the rise of monasticism at this time to the immense changes in the Church brought about by Constantine's legalization of Christianity. The subsequent transformation of Christianity into the main Roman religion ended the position of Christians as a small group. In response, a new, more advanced form of dedication was developed. The long-term martyrdom of the ascetic replaced the violent physical martyrdom of the persecutions. Others point to historical evidence that individuals were living the life later known as monasticism before the legalization of Christianity. In fact, it is believed by the Carmelites that they were started by the Jewish prophet Elias. From the earliest times there were probably individual hermits who lived a life in isolation in imitation of Jesus of 40 days in the desert. They have left no confirmed archaeological traces and only hints in the written record. Communities of virgins who had consecrated themselves to Christ are found at least as far back as the 2nd century. There were also individual ascetics, known as the devout, who usually lived not in the deserts but on the edge of inhabited places, still remaining in the world but practicing asceticism and striving for union with God. Antony the Great was the first to specifically leave the world and live in the desert as a monk. Antony lived as a hermit in the desert and gradually gained followers who lived as hermits nearby but not in actual community with him. One such, Paul the Hermit, lived in absolute solitude not very far from Antony and was looked upon even by Antony as a perfect monk. This type of monasticism is called eremitical or hermit-like, as monasticism spread in the east from the hermits living in the deserts of Egypt to Palestine, Syria, and on up into Asia Minor and beyond. The sayings and acts of the Desert Fathers came to be recorded and circulated, first among their fellow monastics and then among the laity as well. Among these earliest recorded accounts was the Paradise, by Palladius of Galatia, Bishop of Helenopolis, Athanasius of Alexandria, Jerome, and other anonymous compilers were also responsible for setting down very influential accounts. Also of great importance are the writings surrounding the communities founded by Pachomius, the father of Cenobiticism, and his disciple Theodorus of Tabernes, the founder of the Sketi form of monasticism. Ante-Nicene Fathers. As Christianity spread, it acquired certain members from well-educated circles of the Hellenistic world. They sometimes became bishops but not always. They produced two sorts of works: theological and apologetic, the latter being works aimed at defending the faith by using reason to refute arguments against the veracity of Christianity. These authors are known as the Church Fathers, and study of them is called patristics. Notable early fathers include Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Tertullian, Clement of Alexandria, and Origen. Much theological reflection emerged in the early centuries of the Christian Church, in a wide variety of genres, in a variety of contexts, and in several languages, much of it the product of attempts to discuss how Christian faith should be lived in cultures very different from the one in which it was born. So, for instance, a good deal of the Greek language literature can be read as an attempt to come to terms with Hellenistic culture. Examples are the emergence of orthodoxy, the establishment of a biblical canon, debates about the doctrine of the Trinity, about Christology, about the purity of the Church, and about grace, free will and predestination. The Church Fathers, early Church Fathers, or Fathers of the Church, are the early and influential theologians and writers in the Christian Church, particularly those of the first 5 centuries of Christian history. The term is used of writers and teachers of the Church, not necessarily saints. Teachers particularly are also known as doctors of the Church, although Athanasius called them men of little intellect. Greek Fathers, those who wrote in Greek, are called the Greek Fathers. Clement of Alexandria. Clement of Alexandria was the first member of the Church of Alexandria to be more than a name, and one of its most distinguished teachers. He united Greek philosophical traditions with Christian doctrine and valued gnosis, that with communion for all people could be held by common Christians. He developed a Christian Platonism. Like Origen, he arose from catechetical school of Alexandria and was well versed in pagan literature. Origen of Alexandria. Origen was an early Christian scholar and theologian. According to tradition, he was an Egyptian who taught in Alexandria, reviving the catechetical school where Clement had taught. The Patriarch of Alexandria at first supported Origen, but later expelled him for being ordained without the Patriarch's permission. He relocated to Caesarea Maritima and died there after being tortured during a persecution. Using his knowledge of Hebrew, he produced a corrected Septuagint. He wrote commentaries on all the books of the Bible. In Periarchon, he articulated the first philosophical exposition of Christian doctrine. He interpreted scripture allegorically and showed himself to be a Stoic, a Neo-Pythagorean, and Platonic. Like Plotinus, he wrote that the soul passes through successive stages before incarnation as a human and after death, eventually reaching God. He imagined even demons being reunited with God. For Origen, God was not Yahweh but the first principle, and Christ, the Logos, was subordinate to him. His views of a hierarchical structure in the Trinity, the temporality of matter, the fabulous pre-existence of souls, and the monstrous restoration which follows from it were declared anathema in the 6th century. Hippolytus of Rome. Hippolytus of Rome was one of the most prolific writers of early Christianity. Hippolytus was born during the second half of the 2nd century, probably in Rome. Photius describes him in his Bibliotheca as a disciple of Irenaeus, who was said to be a disciple of Polycarp, and from the context of this passage it is supposed that he suggested that Hippolytus so styled himself. However, this assertion is doubtful. He came into conflict with the popes of his time and for some time headed a separate group. For that reason he is sometimes considered the first antipope. However, he died in 235 or 236, reconciled to the Church and as a martyr. Latin Fathers. Those fathers who wrote in Latin are called the Latin Fathers. Tertullian, who was converted to Christianity before 197, was a prolific writer of apologetic, theological, controversial and ascetic works. He was the son of a Roman centurion. Tertullian denounced Christian doctrines he considered heretical, but it has been claimed that later in life he converted to Montanism, a heretical sect that appealed to his rigorism. He wrote 3 books in Greek and was the first great writer of Latin Christianity, thus sometimes known as the Father of the Latin Church. He was evidently a lawyer in Rome. He is said to have introduced the Latin term Trinitas with regard to the divine to the Christian vocabulary, and also probably the formula 3 persons, 1 substance, as the Latin tres personi, una substantia, and also the terms Vetus Testamentum and Novum Testamentum. In his Apologeticus, he was the first Latin author who qualified Christianity as the vera religia, and systematically relegated the classical Roman Empire religion and other accepted cults to the position of mere superstitions. Cyprian of Carthage. Cyprian was Bishop of Carthage and an important early Christian writer. He was probably born at the beginning of the 3rd century in North Africa, perhaps at Carthage, where he received an excellent classical education. After converting to Christianity, he became a bishop in 249 and eventually died a martyr at Carthage. Spread of Christianity. Goths. In the 3rd century, East Germanic peoples migrated into Scythia. Gothic culture and identity emerged from various East Germanic, local, and Roman influences. In the same period, Gothic raiders took captives among the Romans, including many Christians. Precursor to the Great Schism. Leading to the Great Schism, Eastern and Western Mediterranean Christians had a history of differences and disagreements dating to the 2nd century. Among the most significant disagreement was the rebaptism controversy at the time of Stephen of Rome and Cyprian of Carthage. 3rd century timeline 202 Roman Emperor Severus issues an edict forbidding conversion to Christianity. 206 Abgar, king of Edessa, embraces the Christian faith. 185 to 350 Muratorian fragment, first extant canon for New Testament after Marcion, written in Rome by Hippolytus, excludes Hebrews, James, 1–2 Peter, 3 John, includes Wisdom of Solomon, Apocalypse of Peter. 188 to 231 Saint Demetrius, Bishop of Alexandria, condemned Origen. 199 to 217. Keys, presbyter of Rome, wrote Dialogue against Proclus, in Ante-Nicene Fathers, rejected revelation, said to be by Gnostic Cerinthus. See also Allergy. 208 Tertullian writes that Christ has followers on the far side of the Roman wall in Britain where Roman legions have not yet penetrated. 220 Clement of Alexandria, cited Alexandrian, NT text type and secret Gospel of Mark and Gospel of the Egyptians, wrote Exhortations to the Greeks, Rich Man's Salutation, to the Newly Baptized. 217 to 236 Antipope Hippolytus, Logos sect. 218 to 258 Cyprian, Bishop of Carthage, cited Western, NT text type, claimed Christians were freely forging his letters to discredit him. 241 Mani begins to preach in Seleucia Cte Siphon in what is now Iraq. 250 Denis is sent from Rome along with 6 other missionaries to establish the church in Paris. 223 Tertullian, sometimes called Father of the Latin Church because he coined Trinitas, Tres Personi, Una Substantia, Vetus Testamentum, Novum Testamentum, converts to Montanism, cited Western, Gospel text type. 225 Papyrus 45, First Chester Beatty Papyri, Gospels, Acts. 235 to 238 Maximinus Thrax, Emperor of Rome, ends Christian schism in Rome by deporting Pope Pontian and Antipope Hippolytus to Sardinia where they soon die. 248 to 264 Dionysius, Patriarch of Alexandria. See also List of Patriarchs of Alexandria. 250 Apostolic Constitutions, Liturgy of St. James, Old Roman Symbol, Clementine Literature. 250 Letters of Methodius, Pistis Sophia, Porphyry Tyrius, Commodianus. 250 Papyrus 72, Bodmer 5–11 plus, Pub. 1959, Alexandrian, text type, Nativity of Mary, 3 core, Odes of Solomon chapter 11, Jude chapters 1–25, Melito's homily on Passover, hymn fragment, Apology of Feliz, Ps 33–34, 1 pt 1–1–5–14, 2 pt 1–1–3–18. 250 Origen, Jesus and God One Substance, adopted at First Council of Nicaea in 325, compiled Hexapla, cites Alexandrian. Caesarian text type. Eusebius claimed Origen castrated himself for Christ due to Mount 1912. 251 to 258 Antipope Novatian, decreed no forgiveness for sins after baptism. 254 to 257 Pope Stephen I, major schism over rebaptizing heretics and apostates. 258 Valerian's massacre. Roman emperor issued edict to execute immediately all Christian bishops, presbyters, and deacons, including Pope Sixtus II, Antipope Novatian. Cyprian of Carthage. 264 to 269 Synods of Antioch, condemned Paul of Samosata, Bishop of Antioch, founder of adoptionism, also condemned term homoousios adopted at Nicaea. 265 Gregory Thaumaturgus. 270 Antony begins monastic movement. 270 Death of Gregory Thaumaturgus, Christian leader in Pontus. It was said that when Gregory became bishop, there were only 17 Christians in Pontus, while at his death 30 years later there were only 17 non-Christians. 275. Papyrus 47. 3rd Chester BT. Sinaiticus, Rev 9:10-11-3, 5-16-15, 17-17-2. 276. Mani, crucified, founder of the dualistic Manichaean sect in Persia. 220-340. Codex Shakos, manuscript containing a copy of the Gospel of Judas has been written. 281. Rural churches emerge in northern Italy. Christianity is no longer exclusively in urban areas. 287. Maurice from Egypt is killed at Agriano, Switzerland for refusing to sacrifice to pagan divinities. 282-300. Theonas, Bishop of Alexandria. 300. First Christians reported in Greater Khorasan. An estimated 10% of the world's population is now Christian. Parts of the Bible are available in 10 different languages.